I want to start with a question. What would you do if you had $250 trillion? I'm sure there are many things you would do with that sort of money, but what if I told you those $250 trillion were from Zimbabwe? Well, that's a totally different question, because in 2015, 250 trillion Zimbabwean dollars were worth the equivalent of $1. Yep, you heard that absolutely right. The truth is that Zimbabwe is like Venezuela, but on a massive scale. This country has suffered the worst hyperinflation of all time. Since more or less the year 2000, prices were rising higher and higher at an absolutely mind-boggling rate. In 2008, a piece of bread was worth 10,000 Zimbabwean dollars. And now you might be wondering, well, how did all of this happen? Well, the answer, it's pretty simple. One day, Robert Mugabe told his finance minister, "Dude, I don't care how you do it, but man, we need money." And what did the finance minister do? Well, he just pressed the money printing button like there was no tomorrow. So, in conclusion, Zimbabwe had to get rid of their own national currency and let the economy be dominated by foreign currencies, especially the American dollar. But all of this was a little while ago, so what exactly is going on in Zimbabwe now? Well, in recent days, and we're recording this in 2017, the country appeared on the news because of a coup d'etat that spells the end of Mugabe's 37-year-long dictatorship. And yes, my dear friends of VisualPolitik, we must say that coup d'etats are not what they used to be. This was what we could call the Diet Coke version of a coup d'etat. Just have a look at this.
Robert Mugabe to get $10 million payoff and immunity for his family.
In fact, this coup d'etat could sort of be better described as a soap opera. Mugabe, at 93 years old, wanted to die in power, and he also wanted his wife, who's 52 years old, to inherit the presidency. You know, the sort of thing that could only happen in countries like Argentina, North Korea, or perhaps the National Front in France. So, as you can imagine, a lot of people did not agree with this, so the Mugabe clan sent all of their political opponents out of the country. This is what happened at the beginning of November 2017, when they kicked out the vice president, and this guy has a really difficult to pronounce name. I looked it up. I still can't pronounce it properly, but his name is Emmerson Mnangawa. So yeah, sorry if I butcher the pronunciation of his name in this one. The army's reaction to this was immediate, and, well, you probably know the rest of the story. But now the questions about Zimbabwe's future are many. Is Mnangagwa the new Mugabe? Is this man able to resurrect Zimbabwe's economy? Today, well, we are going to answer those questions, but before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
The 2000 effect.
Yes, you are right. Zimbabwe's economy is a total disaster. And I know what you're thinking. If you make a cocktail where you mix dictatorship and Africa, what you get is corruption and poverty, right? Well, you are kind of right, but probably not as much as you might think. In fact, there was a time where Zimbabwe was known as the African jewel. Their fertile soil allowed this country to become the whole continent's barn. And now you might be wondering, well, what happened to a country with so many natural resources, so many rich lands, so many gold mines? What caused it to become such a catastrophe? Well, the answer to that, it definitely has a name, and that name is Rober Mugabe. Zimbabwe has been an independent country for some 37 years, and 37 years is the amount of time that Mugabe has been in power. The decolonialization process of the so-called South Rhodesia, a British colony, ended in a 15-year civil war. On the one hand, we had the white minority that made up just 5% of the population. Despite what you might think, they didn't have the support of Western powers. They declared their independence unilaterally, and therefore no other country supported them. On the other hand, you had the guerrilla troops led by Robert Mugabe, the man who combined anti-imperialist nationalism with a hardcore communist view. Back then, Margaret Thatcher was the UK's Prime Minister, and you might now be thinking, Cold War plus a communist leader plus Margaret Thatcher sounds like a pretty explosive combination, right? Well, you are absolutely wrong. Back then, the UK's priority was to let their former colonies become healthy democracies, and this is why Thatcher herself signed the peace agreement with the Zimbabwean guerrilla fighters and organised elections in the country. These elections were as fair as they could be, given that the country had just ended a civil war and had guerrilla warriors all over the place. And who won the election? Well, of course, it's Robert Mugabe. So now you might be wondering, well, did Mugabe cheat in this election, or was it a fair victory? Well, the evidence actually suggests that yes, he had the support, and yes, he did genuinely win the election. You see, among the majority of the black population in Zimbabwe, there are two major ethnic groups. You have the Shona, who make up 80% of the population, and then you have the Matabele, who are just 10%. Well, Robert Mugabe belongs to the Shona group, and this is why it's no surprise that he won 60% of the vote. So in 1980, the UK granted independence to Rhodesia, and this is how Zimbabwe became a sovereign country, with Mugabe as the president. And during the first 7 years, he basically grabbed all of the power. And in terms of the economy, at least, we got to admit that things actually worked, at least in the beginning. Mugabe respected the property rights of the white population, but in a very Venezuelan fashion, he spent all of the savings from the colonial times. And while we have to admit that although it didn't work in the long run, Mugabe did achieve a great goal. Under his rule, Zimbabwe achieved the highest literacy rate in Africa. 90% of Zimbabweans can read and write. So if you've got your dictatorial to-do list in front of you, well, what's the next thing on it? Well, that's to get rid of the opposition. In this chapter of Mugabe's life, he did not save a penny. He sent the 5th garrison of his army to North Korea so that he could learn about state-of-the-art methods for oppression. And when those soldiers came back, he pretty much said to them, "Alright guys, now go get rid of those Matabeles, wipe them out." This is how the Gukurahundi started. Gukurahundi means, in the Shona language, early rain that cleans the straws by the inside before the spring rain comes. Yep, Shonas, they are pretty poetic. But despite the pretty name, this was an ethnic cleansing that was done pretty much as the manual described, and more than 20,000 people died. And with this, Mugabe gained a great deal of political stability, for he'd killed all of his political foes. But in the year 2000, they really changed. That year, Mugabe decided to start an agricultural revolution in the style of Chairman Mao. It was a real revolution, and everything changed for the worse.
Mugabe decided that the best lands shouldn't be owned by the white minority, so he expropriated that land and gave it to, surprise, surprise, his ministers and political allies.
However, he only gave them the land, he could not give them the knowledge to tend it, so production fell sharply while hyperinflation destroyed the rest of the industries. Since then, Zimbabwe has pretty much been a living hell.
The time of the crocodile.
They say crocodiles wait beneath the water, just showing their eyes and their nostrils until a victim appears. Then they open their jaws and they eat them. This is why the new president of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangawa, is known as the crocodile. Mnangawa was one of those guerrilla leaders during the Civil War, and he has been a minister since 1980. So he spent all of his life waiting under the shadow of the dictator, but his moment has finally come. So far, after this coup, his first steps have been very risky. Here is an example.
Zimbabwe leader's cabinet heavy on military, ruling party.
But this is not enough for Zimbabwe, and he still has a lot of work ahead, but one of the biggest steps has already been taken.
Government amends indigenization law.
The indigenization law is another economic policy made by Mugabe. In this case, he said bigger companies couldn't belong to white people. As you can imagine, the white minority that used to live in the country has already emigrated. They used to be 5% of the population, they are now just 1%. But now the crocodile wants foreign investment, and rejecting someone because of his or her race doesn't seem like a brilliant economic idea. But wait just a minute, because despite all of that, the new president of Zimbabwe might not be the right man for the job.
In a country like this, it's easy to find dark spots on a politician who served such a crazy dictator. And guess what Crocodile did in the 1980s? Yes, He was the Minister of National Security.
So he would have had something to do with that genocide that we mentioned earlier. And being the person who executed a genocide doesn't exactly make you a prime person to run a country. So the question that probably pops into your mind right now is there really someone who can become a true opposition to this regime? And the answer is absolutely yes. In 2008, there was a political party called Movement for Democratic Change, and surprisingly, they beat Mugabe in those elections. Yes, you totally heard that right, and in a dictatorship like Zimbabwe, this meant a big-time political crisis. Mugabe simply couldn't destroy a political opponent who had such political capital. But on the other hand, he also couldn't let him win. And finally, Mugabe, he came up with a solution. He would remain the president, but he would let his opponent, Morgan Tsvangirai, become the prime minister. Of course, this prime minister remained in power for just 4 years, and it was during those 4 years that Zimbabwe started using the US dollar as an official currency after the collapse of their local one. But the country, it still remained in dire straits.
Zimbabwe's unemployment rate at 90%.
This is why Tsvangirai has lost a lot of political capital. So it does seem that in the next election, the CROCODILE has all of the chances to win. Besides, the army is also going to control the process, and the army supports the CROCODILE. One thing must be said here, and that is whoever leads this country next will have a great advantage, for it is impossible to do a worse job than their predecessor. So now the question becomes, do you think the CROCODILE will be able to take Zimbabwe back and make it an African jewel once again, or do you think he's going to turn into the next Mugabe? Well, please let us know your answer in the comments section below, and if you want to know about another African dictator, click on this video to learn about the history of Egypt. Also, do visit our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this video that were not mine. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button to catch a brand new video every week. And if you like this video, well, hit that thumbs up button. And as always, I'll see you next time.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear more of my lovely voice, don't forget to check out the Reconsider podcast at reconsidermedia.com. Reconsider is a podcast that challenges you to reconsider your views by providing context, but we don't do the thinking for you.